welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, in much of the Western debt-fueled, consumption-addicted world, we thought we were rowing our boat gently down the stream. Merrily, merrily, merrily. But that life was but a dream. For in fact, the reality is that we're up a creek without a paddle. Stacy?
Max Keiser, literally, if you listen to this first headline, sold down the river, how Thames Water diverts its tax liability via the Caribbean despite £549 million profit and 6.7% price hike. UK's largest water company received £5 million treasury rebate as well. So Thames Water put up customer bills by 6.7%. They paid their chief executive a £274,000 bonus and made profits of £549 million on a turnover of £1.8 billion. Yet customer satisfaction had dipped and hundreds of people's homes were flooded with sewage.
Yeah, well, this story's got it all. Here you have a basic utility that was built by the taxpayer, built by the people in Britain through their taxes over the years as part of the common wealth, part of the public domain, essentially. It gets privatized through corruption in government, what this government or the previous government, it's corruption. Then you've got private contractors in, they destroy it, they load it up with debt, and it doesn't even function anymore as an operating utility. So people are swimming in their own fecal matter, paying huge taxes, and watching the price of water go up for the Thames, which is, as you see right behind me, a flowing river through the city of London for thousands of years. It doesn't require privatization and financial rape, but nevertheless, that's what Britain gets.
Well, a few things here. First of all, okay, they paid zero tax, zero, because of the way that corporations are allowed to put their income through the Caribbean. No UK citizen could do that. They would, in fact, be thrown in prison if they attempted to do so. So these corporations can do it, and they did load it up with debt. There was a lot of debt. They said the intercompany loans, they call it. So they were able to write off the interest they paid on those loans to themselves. But in terms of what you were saying about privatization in a corrupt way, in fact, everybody in the United Kingdom was involved in it. They were complicit in the corruption because, as the headline in the Mirror talks about, Thames Water pays no corporation tax despite making £549 million profit. So the water industry was privatized in the late 80s by Margaret Thatcher. How did she do it? Well, just like she privatized British Telecom and these others, she gave the people shares. So all the water companies were immediately floated. Now only 3 of those companies are still listed. All the rest were bought out by private equity. In the case of Thames Water, it's owned by Macquarie, the Australian guys who own a lot of the toll booths, by the way, the private roads inside America.
Right, this is basically selling the cow and then buying the milk. Technique that Thatcher ushered in. Now the prices are going higher. The generation after the Thatcher generation, of course, is going to be paying through the teeth, and their standard of living is now less than it was the first time in 100 years here in Britain. Current generation standard of living is dropping underneath the previous generation. So
continuing on this theme of Margaret Thatcher, where she started with this privatization of various things and the Big Bang, the deregulation, this is another thing why we are rowing our boat not so gently up the stream, because we are, as you said, up Bleeps Creek. Because when you look at the global financial system, what has happened is we have a totally deregulated global financial system. Derivatives and fraud and stuff are allowed to happen. Now, the least regulated of all the financial markets, by the way, is the Forex market, the foreign exchange market. This is where $4.7 trillion per day is traded on the global Forex markets. Traders said to rig currency rates to profit off clients. Traders at some of the world's biggest banks manipulated benchmark foreign exchange rates used to set the value of trillions of dollars of investments, according to 5 dealers with knowledge of the practice. So what has been happening here is that employees have been front-running client orders and rigging WM Reuters rates by pushing through trades before and during the 60-second windows when the benchmarks are set, said the current and former traders who requested anonymity because the practice is controversial. Dealers colluded with counterparts to boost chances of moving the rates.
No, I've talked about this before, that no price on any market reflects supply and demand. There's no price discovery. We live in what I call the price hologram. These are prices, every single price on every single market is generated by manipulation and through this type of NSA Prism-enabled holograph-generating pseudo-economy, which is beneficial only for those who are running the simulation. It's a simulated economy. It's not real. And people are falling out of the hologram, the price hologram, and those people are not being cared to or thought about in any way. They're just being rolled over by this, and their lives are meaningless. So this is why I don't understand this incredible duplicity coming out of America, because you hear the leadership talk about insinuating that they care about lives. That's not true. They don't.
Since the crisis began in 2007, what we've been told over and over is that we must move forward. We must not look back. These banks are too big to fail. We need them. Stop banker bashing. So we're always told to continue forward. And day after day after day after day after day after day since then, they are constantly taking half a fraction of a penny there, another fraction of a penny there, another fraction of a dollar there. And it adds up to trillions over the years. And everybody wonders why there are so many people living on food stamps, why so many of the global financial markets have been destabilized, why we need quantitative easing. People don't understand this because over and over we keep on looking forward and not wanting to look back and trust that the governments and the central banks are taking care of us, whether they're spying on us or printing money, that it must be for our own good.
And you know, interest rates, once they start ticking up as they're doing now, you're going to have a lot of bond damage on the balance sheet. And I'm already reading that bonds, the remaining too big to fail banks are going to be entering into a period of consolidation. So we're going to have these too big to fail banks become even much bigger. And of course, all the abuses that come with that will become much worse.
And because of all these abuses, you see over and over that not only are people on food stamps, but Americans and people around the world are having to work longer and longer and longer, 70s, 80s, 90s. You're going to see 90-year-old people working at Walmart doing the checkout. And because they've been ripped off over and over and over, their pension funds have been defrauded, and the inflation has destroyed their purchasing power. So we're going to look at this headline here, banks seen as aid and fraud against older consumers. So there's a civil lawsuit being brought by federal authorities and a consumer law firm against Zions Bank, which is a 140-year-old bank based out near the NSA, I might say, up in Utah, and First Bank of Delaware. And what they've been doing is basically aiding fraud. They've been aiding fraud targeting over 65s. So how they've been aiding is that they look the other way. So what these marketers have been doing are targeting old people, claiming they're from Medicare and that they need to renew their health insurance card. And the person then says, okay, I need this new health insurance card. Here are my bank details. And then they immediately take hundreds of dollars out of their bank account. Well, the old person then calls the bank and requests a refund because this is they've been defrauded. And when they have these chargebacks, usually if it's over a certain percent, like 5%, it's a sign that this is a fraudulent marketer, this is a fraudulent merchant. And they've been instead looking the other way. What they found was that in Zion's bank case, for example, one guy sent an email saying, wow, this account is so fraudulent, there's over 50% case of chargebacks. And his boss wrote back, turning them off and sending them somewhere else is not an option. You know,
a few years ago, banks were getting compensated for the bad bets that they made in the derivatives markets, and they would be given the TARP bailout funds and these types of things for their shoddy management. Now, you know, to take it a step further, they're just not taking reckless bets and getting reimbursed. They're targeting people like elderly, and they're committing massive fraud, knowing that any losses are generating in the system will be more than paid back by their friends in the government and the NSA and Prism, that they all share in the lucre of the fraud. And that's why Washington, D.C. is now the wealthiest zip code in the world. Not L.A., not New York, not Hong Kong, not Tokyo, no, Washington, D.C. And it's all generated by NSA, Langley, CIA, Barack Obama, fraud, 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 fraud. That's all they do, and you're a sucker. Hey, guess what? It might be easier to just top yourself, and that's the message of Obama.
Yeah, and they've been continuing to do this fraud. This fraud, by the way, at Zions Bank, they effectively let between 2007 and 2009, once the crisis was well underway, they were assisting in this fraud, right? They allowed $39 million taken from hundreds of thousands of accounts to be transferred to Canada, India, and the Caribbean. This is where most of the money went. So at first Delaware, however, they said return rates for some merchants exceeded 80%. Yet the more questionable the merchant, the more fees a bank stands to collect, prosecutors say. Every time victims flag an unauthorized charge and demand money back, banks collect fees to process the return. Those fees are far larger, according to banking documents, than the ones charged for processing the original transactions. So they make more money on the fraudulent charges than they make on just plain old vanilla utility-style banking.
Oh, it's like in the war zone. You know, a lot of money is made by selling the helicopters and the guns. There's no ideology, certainly not for America in their current wars. And in the banking sector, it's the same thing. There's no ideology in terms of providing a service. They're mercenaries, they're predators, they're looking to kill people, rip them off, and they go to these conventions, whether it's Bilderberg or somewhere else, and they, you know, hold up their scalps and they get naked and sit in the sweat lodge and have a, you know, jolly good old time about all the people they've murdered and raped and destroyed with their financial terrorism. Bravo, Citibank and JP Morgan and Barclays. You're the best financial terrorists in the world. You're engaged in a financial holocaust. Your moms are proud of you. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half. We'll be talking to comedian Lee Camp.
Preparations for the first woman cosmonaut were strictly classified. Even her own mother knew nothing of the imminent extraterrestrial voyage. During her second orbit, there was a terrifying and unexpected emergency. One wrong move, and the Seagull may never have returned. She later miraculously survived an assassination attempt.
He fired right at my side of the car. 9 bullets were found under my seat.
Valentina Tereshkova, Seagull in Space, on RT.
A highway built on the bones of its makers that winds through one of the wildest and most beautiful regions of Russia. A place that's home to less than 1 million people and the keepers of the great frosts. Join me, James Brown, as I travel to the coldest inhabited place in the world and meet some of the toughest people and hardiest animals on the planet. Just make sure that you keep your eyes on the road. Race to the pole of cold, only on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to comedian Lee Camp, who hosts the hit crowd-funded web show, Moments of Clarity, which you can find online at his site, leecamp.com. Lee Camp, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me. Actually, it's leecamp.net, so.
All right. Well, for those of you in the audience, it's leecamp.net. All right. Now, Lee Camp, you were recently on tour in the UK with your comedy act called Transatlantic Fury. Why the Fury?
It's the same reasons that you talk about every day. It's, you know, the same stuff I talk about in my web series. We're in the middle of a drop-down, drag-out, bloody freaking war, and a lot of us are too dumb, medicated, or blissfully uneducated to realize it. And meanwhile, I love that in America they tell us we're in a recovery. Why? We have the most homeless people in New York City since the Great Depression, and we're in a recovery. You know, looking at stock prices and deciding that's the health of a society is like looking at a dying man and judging his health on how the leeches look. You know, oh, wow, they look pretty healthy. These are good leeches. You're going to be fine.
Now, I got to ask you a question. Transatlantic comedy, that you're doing. If you can give me an idea of the difference in the audiences, because here in Europe, where you've just finished a tour, you were in Ireland and you were in Britain and Scotland, and of course they're having real experience with austerity and other things, versus what's going on in America, just from the audience perspective. Lee, if you can fill me in on that, I'm curious.
I mean, in terms of what's happening in the world, I don't think there is a lot of difference. I think it's the, corporate raping and pillaging of the world that it seems like a lot of people have accepted, like it's a Katy Perry song. We just figure it's going to be around for a while. Might as well try and pretend like we like it. I mean, the difference is not that huge. I mean, sure, there's little subtle differences, but due to globalization, we're all in the same crap storm here.
All right, now, I caught your act with Nick Ravel also, who you're touring with, who's a local British comedian who's doing a lot of political humor, and there seems to be an upsurge in political humor now, finally. And you have something in your act that I liked very much. You talk about a new way to look at billionaires in terms of hoarding, and I thought this was very interesting. If you can talk about that.
Right. One of the things that infuriates me more than anything is not that billionaires have that much wealth, not that the 6 heirs of the Walmart fortune have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 40% of America, but it's that we're told to respect them and look up to them like they're some kind of heroes. They're psychopaths. They're freaking psychopaths. They're no more fit for society than the guy who kidnaps neighborhood dogs and has them lick peanut butter off his crotch, all right? In fact, they're less fit for society because at least Mr. Nutterbutter's making dogs happy. So I think we should view them as the same way we view those people on the TV show Hoarders. All right, these people, you don't respect anybody else who collects 1 million of something. If someone tells you they've got 1 million shoes, you're like, what's the matter with you? So we should view them like hoarders. You don't have to make fun of hoarders, but you don't go to them for advice. No one walks into their houses and is like, wow, you've got a room filled with 18 years worth of yogurt containers and another room filled with old Coca-Cola cans and expired parakeets. This is really impressive.
What struck me about this act, this routine, is that it just is so true, in that the billions of dollars being accumulated by individuals, whether it's Larry Ellison or Bill Gates or Jamie Dimon or these bankers or the corporate chieftains, they are not circulating in the economy in any productive way. The unemployment numbers are horrible, wages are horrible, the economy is stagnant, and you have huge problems because of these hoarders, people who just stack up money in their basement. They don't do anything with it, and it's really a disease. Now, many of these deranged hoarders are also hardcore criminals engaged in ongoing criminal banking conspiracies against the population, and yet the Department of Justice in America has said that they won't prosecute. What's going on there, Lee?
Yeah, I love they say they won't prosecute because that could hurt the economy. Well, don't you think it could hurt the economy and hurt the people of the world when you tell the biggest criminals in the world that they're never going to be prosecuted? What hurts them? What hurts us more than that? And furthermore, I love that the FBI does a report every year where they list all the crime, all the street crime, and it amounts to, these are old numbers, but it amounts to about $4 or $5 billion a year of street crime. Now, white-collar crime, the top corporate crime, amounts to $400 to $500 billion. Again, old numbers. I'm sure it's much higher now. And it's not mentioned. It's not mentioned on the report. That's like listing all the oil spills and leaving out the Exxon Valdez. It's like listing all the terrorist attacks and leaving out Gangnam Style. It's like listing all the greatest sports heroes, all the greatest hockey players of all time, and leaving out Muhammad Ali. I don't know sports. That might be wrong, but you get the point.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about this Prism Nsa scandal, because here's really the worst crisis, a constitutional crisis in history of America. It violates everything in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights put forward by corporations working with government to effectively they've done a coup. There's been an overthrow in government. It's the most tyrannical event we've seen. And yet you've got media outlets like the New York Times and a columnist there by the name of David Brooks, who justifies these actions. Is it because he's corrupt? Is he stupid? Is he a propaganda meister? Is he? How does he face himself? Lee, you've seen this. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I think they've got to prop up the status quo. I mean, you have to, whenever there's a threat to the status quo, you have to jump in there. If you're one of these guys who's making his living, who's making his entire career and everything based on the status quo, you have to jump in there and say, no, 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 it's fine, it's fine. Ignore the man behind the curtain. And you know, this is horrific, this spying scandal, because look, you could believe, just suspend disbelief, you could believe that Obama and Congress right now are the best people in the world. They're all angels, and they're all out to help us and give us a better society. You could believe that, and you can still understand that they have put in place, Obama and Bush have put in place the easiest system of surveillance infrastructure for a tyrant to use. If the next president is not Mr. Angel and comes in, all he's got to do is turn a key, and it's the most horrific surveillance infrastructure. We can't fix regular infrastructure. We can't put money into, say, bridges or roads or anything. All our bridges are about to collapse over here in the United States, but we can put billions and trillions of dollars into spying infrastructure on our own people.
Lee Camp, let me ask you about a tweet that I saw from a friend of mine, Alec Baldwin, who was tweeting that, and if I understand his tweets correctly, he was saying that there's nothing Barack Obama can do against tyranny, against Prism and the NSA, because he would end up like John F. Kennedy. Is this the only thing the left in America has to offer in terms of a comeback or a pushback against this open tyranny? That the president can't do anything because of potential of another, 1963 event?
Well, yeah, the Obama apologists are just insane. Look, I'm on the left too, but you've got to look at the facts, all right? You know, Obama has choices. Even if he can't do everything, he has choices. He can choose to go after all whistleblowers more than any administration before him. He can choose to surround himself by Goldman Sachs advisors and Chase Bank advisors, you know. He can choose to do these things. And so he has plenty of choices, and you look at his choices and you say, this is not the guy of hope and change. You know, there's a great video circulating of Obama 2007 debating Obama 2013, and it is night and day. These are two people of separate political parties debating each other. It's absolute just apologies for something that is unapologetic. You know, you can't really defend this insane borderline fascist spying infrastructure that has been created.
Now, Lee Camp, I've been following your career. You know, I follow comedians now for 25, 30 years, and I must say, I really think you're one of the brightest that's coming on the scene at the moment. I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but you came out of the Occupy Wall Street movement to some degree. There was a lot of rage that was generated during that period. You started doing videos, you started touring, you started making a name for yourself. But that rage in society and the Occupy rage seems to have diminished somewhat. Do you feel like you're like the Wile E. Coyote? You've run off the edge of the cliff and there's nobody there to support you because the rage is gone, it seems. Or am I missing something?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for years, and I think the rage is still there. I think, for one thing, Occupy is still there. Occupying was a technique. It was a tactic, and tactics have to change. And so, you know, tear gas is an acquired taste, and it was a tactic that had to change. But the people that became activated by Occupy are still there, and they're still doing great work. You know, things like strike debt, where they buy up, like, healthcare debt and erase it because the banks are destroying people's lives. Those type of things are still around, and they're still working very hard, so I don't take anything from those activists. But on top of that, I think the rage very much is still there. I think we're in the middle of a drop-down, really bloody war, and you know, a lot of people need to realize it and need to not accept. I mean, the plutocrats have to come up with a way to make sure we don't point the finger at them. You know, and the way is this ideal, which we love in America, of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you want to get yourself up there, you can do it. You know, if you want your bushwhacked, you got to do it yourself. All those things, and it's not people's fault. It's not. 28 million Americans are either out of work or have given up trying, and it's not their fault. You can't say there's something wrong with 28 million Americans. The CEO to worker pay gap has gone up 1,000% since the 1950s. That's not the workers' fault. Like, I think people need to realize it's not their fault and end this defeatism.
You know, I read very interesting statistics, again, on Twitter. Well, I guess this is my main source of information these days, but they were saying that the poorest in America are still better off than 80% of the world's population. So this sets up an interesting question about the apathy of the typical American, because even though they're getting screwed horribly by this government and spied on, they're still, with their measly chicken salaries, able to buy a pizza, sit in front of a big screen TV, pop open a beer, and hang out and do nothing, which is better than 80% of the world's population. What's going to happen? Either America falls down to join the rest of the world into abject poverty, or there's going to be what? More of what we're seeing in Turkey? That is to say, a joining up of this global insurrection against banker occupation? What do you think?
Well, yeah, it's very much true that the wealth we enjoy, the relative wealth we enjoy, is on the backs of these workers in third world countries that are working for pennies so that they can make the plastic trinkets and the crappy T-shirts that we get to wear on a daily basis. And so we do need to realize that, yeah, it's people aren't standing up, I think, largely because we do have our movies and we have our crappy TV shows that keep us asleep and anesthetized against it all. But I don't think, you know, you said what's the alternative? Do we all go back to abject poverty? But I don't think, I think there's very much enough resources around. There's enough water for everybody and bad TV for everybody and food for everybody and shelter. The problem is, like you said earlier, the dollars that are being hoarded in little households around the planet. And, you know, I've heard the analogy that saying something can't be done because we don't have enough money to do it, like feeding everyone or giving everyone water, is like saying that a builder has enough wood, nails, and hammers, but not enough inches. He's used up all the inches. I mean, dollars are numbers on a screen. They are a measurement. And we have allowed that measurement to corrupt our entire system of thinking.
All right, Lee Camp, that's all the time, but thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max. Keep fighting.
Okay, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, comedian Lee Camp. You can find his work at leecamp.net. If you'd like to send us an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.